Are we using cannibalism to tell stories of social challenges, or is it just gratuitous in order to get clicks? Stick around. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Just a Tip with Dr. Vic slash Sex Nerd Podcast. I really don't know that this is going to work. I hope so. I don't know how much I'm going to be editing. We will see. I don't know if I'll be able to get it uploaded. I am still nursing the system along as best as I can. So I'm going to make this episode pretty brief since I don't know how well this is going to work or if I will have all the presets. Just don't know. I've been fighting with my editing system for a couple of months now. So anyway, how are you? Thanks for being patient. All right. So I was recently interviewed in part for an article in Mashable, and the title of that article is Cannibalism is Consuming Pop Culture. What does it all mean? Now, when the journalist contacted me, it really seemed as though we were going to focus on addressing the charges against Arnie Hammer and the show about him, which I have, in full disclosure, I have not seen. I'm looking at the article right here since I have issues with my editing system. So I'm looking at it on my laptop. However, so I was contacted, and mostly what I was asked about was the House of Hammer and the charges against him in respect of his cannibalism or vorophilia kinks. And that's the angle I came from as a sexologist and the research that I've done and others have done. And the journalist was asking if the kink itself is seen as something worse than, I say, other issues like sexual violence and so forth. And so I addressed those questions the way I thought was most appropriate. And you can see that in the article. And then the article was sent to me, and I read it, and I was quite impressed actually with the way the journalist had assembled the whole article. And what the journalist did here, her name is Hannah Flint, is actually used this cannibalism narrative to highlight or to point out that a cannibalism narrative is being used to tell other stories or being used as a way in which to address social issues. Now, she talks about a show called Bones and All, which I'm not familiar with, but apparently it's based on two cannibal lovers facing a tragedy and how they have been defined by marginalization, abandonment, shame, violence, and trauma, with only the romantic love between the two of them offering any kind of true solace. However, the the male figure, the guy that's in here, he decides that even in spite of the love that he's found with his partner, that he just can't go on living as a cannibal. He just can't do it. He deals with too much shame and guilt and suffering, and decides to not save his life as he gets injured during the killing of someone else for the purposes of his cannibalism. And he can't live with the guilt and shame anymore. So he asks his partner, first of all, not to save him, and then to consume him herself. Because in the context of what their cannibalism represents is the desire to either be consumed or consume someone to keep them all permanently. In other words, they can't face loss, so they consume others so as to never ever have to lose them. And he decides he can't live that way and asks her to consume him after his death. Not even love could save him. And that really addresses a number of different psychological ills that we have abandonment, shame, guilt, trying to find love, and finding that if we can't find peace and solace within ourselves, that even a great love cannot provide that to us. We have to find that kind of self-love on the inside. At least that's what I'm understanding here. Another one is talking about American Psycho and the House of Hammer, which addresses actually wealth and wealth inequality, and how one of the folks that was interviewed as well, Mary Wild, who's a Freudian psychoanalyst, cinephile, and co-host of the Projections podcast, she says, what he's lacking is humanity. He sees it in people just trying to make a living, and he needs to take that away from them. In these contexts, cannibalism runs parallel to extreme wealth and privilege within a capitalist system in which wealth often comes at the expense and exploitation of other less privileged humans. But it's important to differentiate, she continues. I'm sorry. No, it goes into where I talk. thought I was quoting Mary. I am not. They go on then to kind of segue, or the journalist segues into what I talked about, which was the difference between people who have fantasies and the difference of people who would commit murderous acts without a shred of empathy. And I'm not going to go on into what I said because, well, you can read it, and I'll make sure to post a link to the article in the description if I can upload this. So we then transition into the Jeffrey Dahmer series, and apparently the person who, again, I didn't see this. I do a lot of reading and watching movies. I'm not really a television person. Ryan Murphy is the one who developed the Dahmer series starring Evan Peters, and they quote here in one part of this show, Dahmer rests his head on the bare chest of Tracy Edwards, who's the man he's going to kill. I want to eat your heart, or I want to hear your heart, Jeff tells the scared Tracy as he pushes him back on a blood-stained bed, strokes his chest, and breathes heavily because I'm going to eat it. After Tracy's escape and the serial killer's arrest, we learn that he had been murdering, carving up, and eating his victims while keeping some bones as keepsakes, a habit psychologically influenced by the perceived abandonment by his mother. This could be seen as a way of preventing his victims of love from ever truly leaving. Mary goes on, cannibalism is a consumption of someone else. So, as a Freudian psychoanalyst, I see that as a longing for intimacy, a longing for psychological or emotional closeness that is actually taking the form of physical reunion or keeping that person as close to you as possible. Physical intimacy in terms of intercourse, that's not going to do it. You actually need to ingest them. You need to metabolize that person. Now, the author goes on and talks about fictional works of with the cannibal trope that can provide fertile metaphorical ground to explore consumptive behaviors involving romance, intimacy, and desire, especially for female writers or female characters, as with Fresh and Bones and all. The mere concept of pleasure, especially tied to feminine pleasure, has been considered taboo or worthy of derision, not just in art, but in society in general, says Kaylee Donaldson. She is a critic and pop culture writer for Pajiba. In its most basic form, romantic fiction can be a great way to bust those taboos and dig deeper into our desires. It's a safe space to speak. And genre fiction can be a great way to dissect those trickier areas if it's done well. The article goes on. We're taught to walk this literal and figurative thin line of femininity, says Chelsea Summer, author of cannibalistic body horror novel A Certain Hunger. You have to be desirable, but not too desiring. It's a test that female humans are set up to fail. So as you can gather from some of these little excerpts that I've taken from the article, that the author really interestingly dissects cannibalism and the cannibalism or cannibal trope as a way to look at varying social challenges and use it as a storytelling tool or a narrative to discuss other things that might be too jarring if you talk about them directly. Once again, art and science come together. Like I said, I addressed it more from the sexuality, forensic research perspective, where I differentiated between those with various types of, let's say, cluster B personality disorders, or people who are on the BDSM kink side. I've done that in other episodes on the channel, so I don't really need to rehash that. But I highly suggest that you take a look-see at the article. Like I said before, I will post the link in the description. And I'm really hoping that I'll be able to upload this episode. I know it's kind of short. I'm still testing the waters here. I might have to replace this whole entire editing system. It's been suggested to me quite strongly that that's something I'm going to have to come to terms with. We'll see. I'm a creature of habit. Also, and I will post a link to their website, I'm going to be giving a talk at the most fabulous place in Vegas, as far as I'm concerned now. It's a new discovery. I was introduced to it by my social media coordinator, and within half an hour of being told about it, we were headed over there. I'm going to be teaching a class on, or I'm giving a lecture on sex and death at Cemetery Pulp on the 25th, I believe, of February. I'm traveling a lot this month, so let me pull up my calendar here real quick. Let's see. The class will be Saturday, February 25th at 7 o'clock. There are limited seats. It's $20 per person. I'm going to actually cover 4 different topics in that class, or the lecture. First one, I'm going to devote about 15 minutes to each one of those topics. The first one is, can frequent orgasm prevent death? I actually discovered some really interesting research that seems to indicate it can reduce sudden death by a significant percentage, which I was rather stunned by. How we use sex to cope with mortality. And I actually did a book recommendation called Staring at the Sun by Irwin Yalom. And it really it dives into how we as human beings use sex to deal with our own mortality, especially as we're facing it, if we're facing impending death. Then we talk about sex and death in film, and I made 2 film recommendations. One is Brain Damage from 1988. The other one is Teeth from 2007. And then finally, we're going to talk about necrophilia, death fetishism, and so forth. And I think probably the sex and death in film will parlay over into that final topic, but I'm going to approach this from an academic perspective, and I'm hoping that people can attend. Like I said, seats are limited. You can go find Cemetery Pulp on Instagram, and it's very simple, at Cemetery Pulp. They are fantastic. We actually just did a butterfly pinning class over there, and I had a great time. So with that, I am going to end this episode. I doubt I'm going to be doing a lot of editing with this. Like I said, I'm actually a little stressed about it. We'll see. Maybe I'm making a big deal out of nothing. However, with that, I'm going to wrap up today. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Sex Nerd Podcast / Sex Nerd Podcast. I just said that, actually. Sex and Just a Tip with Dr. Vic. You get to see the BTS version of this podcast. I'll see you later. Have a great day.